me maybe over a year ago that I would come up and share my testimony. Many of you may not know, but I'd been gone for quite a while. And then circumstances led me back here. That which I will get later on into my testimony is how the miracle that happened that brought me back. The history of my family, I will go back a little ways. They were always in a religious type of atmosphere. I think it was my mom, which was more or less the leader of the family. My dad was more or less there as a support for her, just in case we got out of hand. But in our family, there was 10 kids, and needless to say that supporting 10 kids, it was a very difficult thing for them to do. My dad and my family, they were more or less in the farming community. They would go around and we would work in different fields, whether it was cotton, whether it was fruit, whether it was grapes, watermelons, you name it, we were out there doing it as we were growing up. But, my mom was always looking for something better as far as knowing a little bit more about God. We were Roman Catholic at the time when we were going around, working in all these different areas. There was camps that we lived in, and they had a little priest who would come in and he would minister to us. And we would go in and we would be there and worship. And depending on the season of which fruit or whatever was available, there was different camps throughout the area that we would go in and worship. And then when that job died down, we would move to another one. So our lives are always moving from place to place in different schools here and there. And one of the things that I'd noticed about the Catholic Church when I was a young age, that we would be doing the catechism thing, and we were the only ones that would get the wafer. The priest was the one who was always drinking the wine, and I believe it was real wine that they were drinking. And so as time went on, we were getting a little bit, not really interested in the denomination. And I think it was my aunt that introduced my mom into learning more about being a Jehovah's Witness. And there was a different change because they talked more about God. It wasn't ceremonial like it was in the Catholic Church. It was more getting into the center of what they would say is Jehovah, getting to know him. And as time went on, they also did the ordinance services. And what we noticed in particular was that there was only a certain type of people, a certain amount of people that were allowed to participate in the ordinance service. They never did the foot washing like we do, but what they did is they did the wine and they did the bread. And so we had asked, why aren't we able to do that as well? Because it was something that the church was participating and we wanted to participate in it. And their answer was that only a select few, only part of the 144,000 were able to participate in that ceremony. And, that struck us kind of weird, kind of funny. And we began to get disillusioned in that system as well. But we stayed there. They were nice people, I'll give them that. And so we did learn a little bit more about God or Jehovah, according to them. More of the religion type of atmosphere. And it just so happened that as we grew, we were there in that denomination maybe 3-4 years. And then we moved from the outskirts. Well, we actually came from Brawley, California, which is way down south, and we came to Fresno. And where we lived, it was right next to one of the public schools there. And so my brother, one of my older brothers, it was 5 boys, 5 girls. And one of my older brothers would always take one of the little watchtowers to school, and he would read it. And just so happened that his teacher noticed that he was reading that Watchtower. Then she asked him, "Do you like to read about religious things?" And then he said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay." So the following day, or maybe a few days later, she brought him a little magazine. And she said, "Well, if you like to read religious books, here's this one." And it was the Junior Guide. And so he brought it home and he was reading it. And so a couple of days later, the teacher asked him if he liked the book. And she said, "Yeah, he liked it." So he said, what she did was she gave him a couple more to bring home. So not only that he could read, but also my brothers and sisters. And a few days later, or a week or so later, she said, "Well, here's something for your parents to read." And she gave them the Review and Herald and Signs of the Times. And so we started reading those, and I was just kind of going with the flow. And it happened maybe a month, 2 months later that she requested, "Well, can I come to your house and talk with your parents?" And then so he came back and he said, "Talk to my mom and dad." And then he explained that it was the lady that was giving them the literature. And he said, my parents said, "Sure, have them come over," because she was always learning, always looking for something different. And just so happened when they came, they brought the pastor in, and they talked back and forth. And I can remember them talking about God, religion, about Christ. And she was very interested, and they asked, "Would you like to take Bible studies?" And she said, "Sure." She wanting to learn more. And so they came in and they brought us all in together who were able to comprehend what was going on. And we started taking Bible studies. And as we were taking Bible studies, they were bringing in special people to come and visit with us. And one of the greatest moments that I can remember during that cycle was, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Ben Glanzer. Ben Glanzer was the first or second tenor to the King's Heralds. And he had already retired. And they brought him in, and he serenaded us for an afternoon one Sabbath. And I couldn't believe the melody and the tone was something that I had never heard before. And I was captured by his voice as he sat there and sang. And then he asked for a request. And then my mom says, "Do you know the Holy City?" And he says, "Yes." Because that was I guess later on, one of the favorites that they used to sing. And so right there, in a cappella, nobody else accompanied him, he sang the Holy City. And that was beautiful. And then he asked for another request. And my dad's favorite song was the 90 and 9, the parable of the lost sheep. And so he was singing that song, and when he got done singing, the pastor that was there explained the parable about the lost sheep. He says that, there has been many implications to that parable, but he says when there's one that is lost, Jesus will leave the others and go search for the ones that are lost. And we made that connection. We were the ones who were lost in a different system and wanted to learn more about Christ. And then we eventually went through all the Bible studies, and then we were baptized into the Adventist Church. I was maybe 10 or 12 at the time. And I remember going through that process, and I think I went through the motions just because everybody else was doing it. But I didn't fully understand what a commitment was to fully be baptized, understanding what Christ has done for me. I just baptized because my brothers were getting baptized, and so I was the thing to do it. And it was a wonderful thing that I went through it, and I did feel rewarded, and somehow the Holy Spirit actually came in and kind of spoke to me that, yes, I'm in the right track. And so one of the things that we like to see is when people come in with children and families and stuff, we want to get them into Adventist school. So there was, I believe there was 8 of us who were, I guess, old enough to be in school, and 8 of us were selected to go to the academy. Now, having that many kids in your family, you couldn't afford very much. It was a struggle. And so, but they wanted us in, and so the church sponsored us to go in and go into the academy. It was okay, but later on, I think it became a burden for the church because that was a lot of money that was going out, and they began to feel the strain, and they wanted my parents to begin to start paying. And so, since we couldn't do it, they said no, but they kept us there. And I think one of the teachers that was part of probably the committee or wherever, he wasn't too happy with the thought of us, being sponsored like that. I remember his name to this day. And I remember one day he was asking the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, being a small kid, you have big dreams. You want to be, I mean, you can imagine what a young person would want to be, a doctor or a nurse or whatever. And I raised my hand up and I says, I want to be a general in the Army. Just off the cuff, because we had been used to seeing John Wayne and all those movies and all those actors and stuff doing great things. And so in my mind, I wanted to go in and do great things. But the teacher looked at me and says, what do you mean you want to be a general in the Army? I says, how are you going to afford to get there? And he said, and another thing is I wasn't too, I don't want to say bright, but in academics, I didn't excel. I was more or less in the lower half. And I didn't do well in class. And so he said, your family can't even afford to put you through school, and you're not even doing good in school. Your grades are really bad. How do you expect to be a general in the Army? And as he was berating me at that time, and it's very vivid in my memory, that all the kids there were turning around and looking at me because I sat kind of in the back of the class. And as I sat there and looked at him, all the kids were looking at me, and I felt, man, like really small. And I was really hurt. And so I petitioned my mom to allow me to go to public school. And so we had a big meeting as far as what had happened. And I was crying. I was, really hurt. And I couldn't really defend myself at that young age. And the teacher was there, and we talked about everything, and nothing ended up happening. The teacher was still there, and so I was feeling bad enough and hurt enough that I did not want to be in that school anymore. And so my parents allowed me to leave and go to public school. And so in public school, I was there for several years. And so somehow it worked out that they wanted me back, and I actually went back to school after, I had won up several grades, and I was no longer in that teacher's class. And so, so when I was there, nothing changed as far as the teasing or the ridiculing. And so I was a little bit older, and my dad had always taught us how to defend ourselves. And being bullied in school, I mean, it happened way back when, even when I was that small. And so my dad had taught me never take any kind of bullying from anybody else, stand up for yourself. And that's what I did. He taught me how to fight, and there was a lot of fights that I went through even in a Christian school. And so it just turned out that because I was being teased and I was fighting, that they brought me in and to the principal and told me, we can't allow you to be doing that. And no matter what I told him, it says this guy did this guy did that, and I defended myself. This is the way we don't fight. We don't want to have you in a classroom with that type of attitude. So here again, then I left. And I spent my years and from, I think it was like the sixth grade on and through high school, I spent it in public school. And the interesting thing about when I went to public school, it was the same atmosphere. I mean, but there you knew where you stood, right? But I ran into several of the teachers there who were Adventists. Even though I was an Adventist then, I still got mentored by teachers in the public school system that were Adventists, and that kind of kept me in the loop where I never lost faith. And so I went in through high school and I graduated. And going through high school and all that, I was going, doing the farm labor and everything else. And one of the students said, "Hey, I'll see you out in the fields." And right then I thought, wow, is that going to be my life? Is that going to be what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life, going from field to field and doing farm labor? And so I said to myself, no, that's not going to happen to me. And so I enrolled in community college, and I ended up taking business, business class or something like that. And so one of the things that, all the typing classes, all the administrative work that goes into being in business, I excelled in that. But one of the things that really took me down was math. And I don't think you guys would have been able to teach me anything because I could not focus on it. It was one thing to do math, division, addition, everything else, a little bit of algebra, but when they started throwing in the alphabet, into these equations, I was saying, it kind of threw me for a loop. And then they would tell me, well, solve for X. So what number belongs in X? I said, well, you got to figure it out. And they said, well, and X can be any number. Is that correct? X can be any number. And I would say, okay, 7. And they said, no, so 5. And they said, no, you got to work it out. And I could never get it to work out. And so math was something that, I really, really struggled with until later in life. And so one of the things that I realized was I didn't have any business being in business. And so I left college and I went out to work. And I see my time is just about done, so I'll give you a couple more minutes. And so I went to work, and just so happened, this was in my late teens, that there was some Voice of Prophecy seminars going on at the church. And that was in the Fresno Central Seventh-day Adventist Church. And there was a speaker there that came in from the Voice of Prophecy. His name was Byron Spears. And if any of you don't know about Byron Spears, this man was they called him the walking Bible. Basically because everything that he spoke from the pulpit, he never opened his Bible. And when he spoke of a text, he would quote it and quote it and quote it. And I fell in love with the manner of the way this preacher taught. And during the end of the service, or the series, they made the altar call. And I was so impressed and I was so stricken by the Holy Spirit that I wanted to stand and give my life to Jesus. But that's got to be one of the hardest things that anybody can do. Because all these thoughts begin to get into your mind. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? I can't do this and I can't do that. And it took all my strength, everything that I had in me to make that stand. It was like a big weight just holding me down. And then finally, I stood up and I gave my heart to Jesus. And after the series was over, he went to a little town called Lindsay. And there I went out there every weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. I drove, it must have been 50, 60 miles. And I drove all the way that way because I was so enraptured with the way this man spoke. And after the series, I met with him and I told him, I want to get into the ministry because I felt so convicted that that's where God wanted to lead me. And so I was rebaptized again because I really understood what it meant to give my life to Christ. And so I asked him if he would send a letter of recommendation for me to attend college right up there and go into the ministry. And he did, and I was accepted with no money, no backing, no scholarships or anything. God made it possible for me to afford to go to school up at PUC. And I was so excited because when I went there, I met with a lot of the kids that I knew when I was in the academy. Kids I really got along with. And some of them were in the ministry. Well, actually, mostly all of them were in the ministry. And so there, was my trek. And this is where I'm going to stop for now. Because there were so many things that went through my life then that I really grew in the gospel, with my relationship with Christ. And that was, I went through there, and that's where I met my now wife, girlfriend, Diana. And so I'll go ahead and quit for now, but it was a very exciting time for me then, but there was also difficult times and disappointing times that I will share with you the next time. Thank you.